Hey, you're listening to Blindsight. Let's go. Mental health isn't something to take lightly. It's time to fight. It's time to thrive. Let's do this.
Welcome to Blindsight. This is your host, Bill Lundgren. Delighted to have you with us today. And today we're going to do a subject that I've mentioned to a number of people that I was thinking of doing, and they all agreed, do it. And so it's going to be a talk program between myself and our producer, Jonathan Price. And what we're talking about today is how to keep your sanity in a somewhat insane election season. And there are a couple things that I think we need to look at in terms of our well-being. One, in terms of how we self-care. But I think we have a chance. I want to talk about communication with someone whose opinions are different than ours, or someone that is very abrasive in presenting that opinion. What do you do? And it's an issue of communication, but it's equally important. So I'm glad to welcome Jonathan back on the air. How are you?
I am excellent. I'm ready for the weekend, and it's going to be fantastic. The sun is shining. The weather, I really enjoy this Colorado weather. I was talking with my daughter about how seasons change and how kind of funny Colorado is, because we go from these upper 90s to we have a huge drop, and it's like 60 degrees one day. And then it kind of bounces back up into the upper 80s for a little while. And then it does a huge, massive nosedive into the lower 50s. And then it bounces back up into the 80s, kind of mid 70s somewhere. But it just kind of keeps yo-yoing until we kind of level out in November, October, November. And it's just a fun kind of, and it does the same thing, but in reverse in the spring. But it's fun to talk with Ava about all these different changes and all these different seasons. And we track the sun in where it rises and sets. And so we can see like where we're at in the sun cycle. She loves astronomy and space and all that kind of stuff. So 11. Yeah, she's 11, and she every night I catch her either doing math in her math book, or writing, or reading, or searching about something on Mars or Venus, or black holes. Like,
wow,
she's just
there
fun.
are worse things you can catch an 11-year-old doing.
Oh, I know. I'm so lucky. Blessed. I know, it's pretty. But nuts. I
tell people back east that in Colorado, we can have 4 seasons in one day.
It's true. It's true. Mm-hmm. And
they don't believe me until they come here.
Well, it was funny when I was on my trip in Boston, we were talking with one of our Uber drivers, and we were asking him how the winters were in Boston. And he said, oh, they're not that bad. The snow usually stays on the ground for 5 or 6 days, and then eventually it gets cleared off. And I was like, what? And I'm thinking, and I told him that Colorado, we can get a foot of snow and the roads will be completely dry the next day.
Right.
And he's like, how in the world is that possible? I was like, well, we've got a really good snow cleaning crew. And then 2, the sun, we're a lot closer to the sun than Boston is. And so, yeah, it's pretty good.
Well, the thing is, the snow may not pile up as high in Boston, but it's heavier with a higher water content. And that makes a big difference.
It really does.
And that's
it gets
one of
slushy
the things I
and wet
when
and
I
gross
moved here. Mm-hmm.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah.
But
it's a season now that a lot of things are happening that are very confusing for people. Yeah. Not just the Colorado weather, but the political weather, with changes and people making accusations and so forth that are false and, getting refuted. And now they're worried about AI and so forth. And it gets pretty frightening for a lot of people. And in trying to figure out how to, Like you can tell your daughter about the position of the sun and the weather and so forth, and it tends to be, on the whole, consistent, sometimes consistently confusing. But when you look at the temperature in the political realm, then there's a whole lot of dynamics that we need to pay attention to take care of ourselves. And that's what we want to talk about today. And the best way that I can describe it is that we need to take our temperature, just as we take the temperature of the outside, our emotional temperature, to see what's going on internally, because our body will tell us that it's upset, nervous, anxious, whatever. And just like we have to view the temperature of Colorado in order to know what to wear when we go outside, we need to pay attention to what's going on internally for you, for us, for each of us. And one of the ways is just the biggest thing is to stop and be silent and just take your emotional temperature, sit and say, how am I feeling? Do I feel nervous inside, butterflies, whatever? Am I anxious? Am I depressed? What is going on? And then on that basis, make some decision about what we need at that particular moment. One of the things during the people don't realize, I don't think they realize that with all this noise and so forth, there's cortisol going through our system, our anxiety hormones, and they can be very damaging to us. And yet it's very stimulating. We're feeling something, and that's that sort of generates that. Oh, I'm feeling something. I've got to respond to it, and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's deceiving because it's not necessarily good energy. And that's why I'm asking people to take a moment to turn off the radio, turn off the discussion, and just close your eyes and say, how am I feeling at this moment?
Yeah. Well, it's really hard to do in a politically charged environment, and you have everybody trying to give you their opinion because their opinion is the truth or their truth or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And I want to break and pause right here real quick because I want people to know kind of where we're coming from as two people who are on kind of opposite sides of the aisle, but we still value each other's friendship.
Right.
And I think it's important that when you guys are listening to this discussion, that you're hearing the inflection, the tone, the discussion for what it is. Not that we're pushing any sort of political agenda, because that's not what we're going to be doing on this episode. We're going to make sure that we're not talking about policy, and we're not talking about who's right and who's wrong and what should be done, what shouldn't be done. That's not going to happen in this show. What we want to emphasize is that if there's a candidate or if there's an issue or if there's something that you are, and this doesn't have to be presidential, this can be whatever, you insert XYZ problem here. Whatever it is that you're going through and you have somebody that's on the opposite stance of you, it's important to make sure that you're understanding and hearing what they're saying versus just trying to speak louder and faster than what they're doing. So just make sure that we're listening. So you're going to hear a lot of listening and a lot of back and forth, not in a combative manner, but in a genuinely trying to get to understand the differences in how we address mental health when it comes to political climate.
Thank you for putting it that way. I was going to talk second about discussion with others, but I think what you bring up is natural for us to talk about. That point of when we get into a discussion with another person who, whether they're in opposite sides or they're giving a different perspective of your side, I think the key word is to be curious
Yes.
about the other person's view, whatever that view is. I would encourage you to be curious, not because it's going to change your mind, but the question is to take it off you and having to defend anything, but ask the person, well, that's interesting. How, tell me more about it. Or, be curious in trying to understand the person's viewpoint, even though you don't share it. Because that can be very insightful for you. It also turns the temperature down, because if you show an interest in the person, they're not going to tend to raise their voice or try to change your mind. I think right now, my impression, this is unprofessional impression, that a lot of people have already made up their minds and they're trying to get somebody else to agree with them.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're not going to change that person's mind, and the person's not going to change yours, but really what's to be exchanged is kind of the perspective. If, for example, you tell me something and I don't agree with it, but I say, but if I reflect on it, so that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of that, or something for me to ponder the fact that you see things from that viewpoint, and I may not change my mind, but if I understand, it really makes it easier for me to discuss any particular issue. And I'm not going to use that understanding to try to change it. As a therapist, I would tell patients, I can't change you.
Yeah.
I know I'm a wonderful therapist, brilliant and, insightful, but a
regular Gandhi here.
but if you don't want to change, you're not going to change.
Right.
Now, what I can do is to tell you what ways you might want to change or what benefit it would be to change, but that's totally up to you. And I think that's true in a lot of discussions that we have, that we're trying to yell at people and make them believe the same thing we do.
That's right.
But we're not going to do it. But if we understand the other person's position, it's something to think about, and think of it in relation to what our thinking is. Not to change our mind, maybe,
right,
but to understand. And understanding is what we have, unfortunately, not a whole lot of right now.
Well, let's unpeel this onion one more layer. And you mentioned curiosity. If you take that curiosity and you start scratching at the intent behind what somebody is saying, why are they saying that? Why do they believe that? You may actually come to the conclusion that you agree on more things than you're actually opposed to.
Exactly.
And that's a very trippy scenario, because you may be at polar opposites and polar opposite ends of the spectrum, and be so frustrated because you may feel like that person isn't hearing you or trying to understand you. But then when you agree that, oh, this is a shade of blue, it may not be my cup of tea blue, but it's a shade of blue that I can get on board with. We kind of agree that at least we're not talking about now red and green. We're at least in the same color ballpark, spectrum. Right. Yeah. And so if you can get to the same ballpark, you can kind of boil it down to a similar function. We're too many times looking for, what are you believing? What are we believing that is conjoined together that we can agree on? Let's start there, instead of let's saying, okay, I believe this and you believe that. Okay, well, we're set in our ways. We're sticking the muds and now we're done. That's not how we're going to move anything forward in this society.
For example, a topic like the economy, everybody has a different opinion, but sometimes it's if I take a magazine and I put it between you and me, you see, we both see the same magazine, but we see, we might see the cover of Time, but you're looking at an ad. The ad side of Time. We're looking at the same magazine, but we have different viewpoint.
That's right.
And both of us are accurate.
Right.
It's just we're looking,
Well,
and we can both have a truth, as we were talking
yeah.
about earlier. Both can be true. It's just how we reflect on it, how we report on it, and what perspective we're coming from that really may be different. But it's valuable for me to know that you're looking at the back of the magazine and for you to know that I'm looking at the front. That's why we have a different, and yet we're both correct.
Right.
And
we're both looking at Time magazine. It's funny.
Exactly. And that it becomes important to begin, now, and then you have a commonality that you can perhaps look at some of the things we might, and that could be the issue of economics, it could be anything. And you can respect the person says, well, I think the economy can be helped by this.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, see, that's your perspective, but I see the economy needs to have that. But that doesn't mean that either one of you are wrong. It just means you're looking at it from a different perspective. And it's when we look at the perspective, then we begin to understand, and then we can communicate, and then we can say, oh, okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that I agree that that's as important as X, but at least we know we have that commonality, and the shouting stops.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there takes a wisdom and a humility to be able to ask those questions. And you've got that. We have lost the ability to have civil discussion and discord when it comes to, I'm going to say 95% of every topic that ever comes up, period. It could be politics, it could be economics, it could be parenting, it could be everything. And when we fail to have a civil discord and say, look, I hear your opinion and it's very interesting to me, so let me ask you some more questions about it because I genuinely, curiously want to know more. And sometimes the line of questioning can be in line with that of a devil's advocate. But if the intent is pure behind the questioning, you get a long way with just a few questions.
Well, I think we've gotten, we get into black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We look at things, there's only one way to look at something, or there's one opinion. And again, things be not, I don't know whether it'd be nice to have things black and white, but it certainly would be easier. But few things are black and white. And you add on to it something that's been real important for me to talk about. Within us, there are two things we have to pay attention to. One is our emotion and our logic. Mm-hmm. And too often we work from one perspective rather than the other. We might be totally logical, completely block out the emotion, or we may be all emotion and the logic is out the window. And we need both. And when we get into things like the political discussion, and particularly if there's a lot of energy around the discussion, and we're really more into the emotion, and that's good to have. But you see, then we have to step back and say, wait a minute, logic, that's what we're talking about. What's true? Or maybe both of us are true and know the truth. But we have to mix that logic in, and when things are getting illogical or heated or whatever, we're talking too much in the emotion. Then we have to figure out, well, wait a minute, we're like we were just saying, two truths.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a logic thing rather than an emotional thing. We say, this is how it is. And when we go into thinking with some logic, or sometimes when you hear something on the social media and it just sounds really crazy, that's the time to step back. Now, why do I think that's out of the ball field? And once you look at it logically, say, then you begin to piece it together, and you make a decision what it is that you think is accurate.
Yeah.
Then the logic helps to reduce the emotion.
Yeah.
But when all that excitement in your body is physiologically, it's the emotions are getting in charge, and that's when you need to pull back. And that's when I talk about self-care. That's when you need to step back. Particularly if you're getting really caught up in the emotion. And when I talk to couples and doing couples work, I give them a certain time period. If you're not able to resolve something in a certain amount of time, and they can agree with the amount of time, you have to agree, okay, we're going to table this for an hour or whatever it is, and we're going to go do something else, take a walk or whatever. Then you can come back and discuss the issue because you've had some time for cooling down. But we don't do that for political discussions or what's going on right now. And that's I think is very dangerous.
It is. But I love the time frame approach because I work on a time frame kind of approach in my daily life. And if I was in a situation where I was in counseling or I was in a discussion with somebody and somebody put down a stopwatch and said, you've got 5 minutes to come to an agreement on X, Y, and Z topic. And maybe there's a consequence after. Maybe the consequence, if you're in a dating situation or a married situation, that the consequence is the other person, if you don't get to come to an agreement, gets to, pick the restaurant, or you both have to take an ice bath or something, something goofy. But it forces you to think very quickly on your feet and be able to come up with a common ground so that you are now fighting with each other and not against each other to solve a particular goal.
Solve a problem. But you see, at the same time, if you have that cooling down period, and see, what people are afraid of when we say, well, we have to stop this discussion, they think we'll never get back to it, particularly in couples work. We're not going to, no, we're going to come back to it in an hour or whatever time we agree on. You've calmed down. You've had a chance to let your logic come a little bit to the fore, calm down the adrenaline high that comes from an argument. And then you're more likely to see a solution you might not have seen in the heat of battle. And that's true politics, whatever it is. And, it's that taking care of ourselves to walk away with an agreement to come back. See, that's the important thing. You're not walking away and just turning your back. You're saying, I'm willing to continue this discussion once the tension has been dropped. And then the same thing in terms of when you have the radio on and in constant news, you're not giving yourself a break.
Yeah.
And all that adrenaline is going through your system and you're, hyper or you're depressed or whatever, the reaction to the news, and you're just continuing to feed that. Right. But if you say, one of my things I've started to do, I work out, I do stretching exercises in the morning, and I used to listen to the radio, to the news, because that's a half hour that I'm otherwise occupied. But I've decided of late, I turn off the news. And on top of that, since I'm hearing impaired, I wear hearing aids. I take the hearing aids out. And it's delightful. I just do the workout. I do the count. Nothing disturbs me. And then after I finish the workout, then I can go turn the news on and whatever. And I'm much better, in better control and better place to be able to hear what's on the news or to talk to somebody about some topic. But if we don't give ourselves a break and we just allow that barrage to come at us, 24/7, it's not good for us physiologically, let alone mental. And the same thing in terms of giving ourselves breaks to take a walk, to take the dog out, to, again, I have a dog. He's a guide dog. I live in a condo, so I have to take him out, which is the best thing in the world for me because it gives me that break. And if I leave the radio, the TV in at home and get away from it, then I can think more clearly. And so that's the mixture I'm talking about of self-care, but also in terms of communication. The same thing for communication. If I keep arguing with people about any subject, I'm not going to get anywhere.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But if and as you say, if we say set a time, we'll talk about it for X period of time, we're forced to come to some kind of resolution, or maybe forced, or at least we know that it's time to take a break, and we'll come to a solution later. But the other piece is also for us not to, I'm asking people not to be wanting to change anybody's mind as much as to share and have them encourage the sharing of where we're coming from about any issue. We were joking earlier about weather, and I came from the East, so I have a different picture of weather than you do.
Yep.
And so I share with you, the snow has more water content, and that's why, it takes longer even to get rid of it. And you were sharing about here where it's a drier climate, and you see it's the same topic, the same experience, but both of us are true. Both were telling a truth. The difference was, two different locations here in the West and in the East. And that's how...
Well, but Bill, mine's right and yours is wrong.
Oh, of course, because we're in Colorado, so we have to go only with Colorado's information.
That's right. Nowhere else exists other than Colorado.
That's right. Well, nothing really exists that's any worth talking about other than Colorado. But right now, and I have a feeling we'll probably be talking about this subject again, because it's a little more toxic right now as we get closer to the election, unfortunately. I have a friend of mine who went to a travel agent to book travel to Europe, and the travel agent said that happened to be she was amazed at the number of people who have signed up for international travel between the dates of November 1st and November 10th.
I believe it.
People wanting to get out of the country because they're afraid.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
And that should not be.
It shouldn't be.
But you see, we've let the tension go up as if the louder we yell, the more truthful people will think we are.
Well, and here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to talk about politics. You just don't have to. You can turn your Facebook off. You can turn Twitter off. You can turn YouTube off. You can turn the news off. You have that ability. You have the power. You have the control to put into your mind the things that you want. Now, if you don't and you start subscribing to those things, that's on you. You are the only one who can either piss yourself off or you can calm yourself down. Which one do you want?
And you see, the news doesn't really change. It may sound like it, but it doesn't really change that much. So if you listen just to a few minutes in the morning and just to a few minutes in the afternoon, there's not going to be that much of a variance.
Well, no, the news hasn't changed in 300 years. We were standing on the site of the Boston Massacre, and when you think about the story of the Boston Massacre, if you don't know the story, you think, oh my gosh, hundreds of people must have died in the streets of Boston due to the British infiltration and the whatever. 5 people died. Yeah, it's 5 people. That's horrible. But what they did was, in order to enhance the revolt against England, they said it was a massacre. And these things happened that, while yes, they did happen, they blew it so far out of proportion that it actually rose up people to take on Britain and take on England. And
That's right.
It was just, we've been doing the same thing for as long as humans have been around. We love stories, so we just apply it to politics, and it just happens. And so somewhere in the muck of it is truth.
Because there's a belief, it must be true because it's the enemy that did it, and they are bad people. That all or nothing thinking, and we're right, and so we call it a massacre. It must be right because they're bad people. There's all these assumptions that we make rather than looking at the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to become even more complicated with the AI because we don't know who's saying what.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for us to have that curiosity. If we can figure out, okay, who's saying, why are they saying it? Where are they coming from? Then we have a better shot at least getting something more truthful, or maybe several truths, than just responding emotionally to the word massacre, for example. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I know that's hard. It's easier for us to say this on the sideline than when you're right in the middle of it, but it becomes vital for us to do it when we're in the middle of it.
Yep. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. And if you guys have more topics that you want us to cover, let us know, 720-712-8856, or you can email us at feedback@aftersight.org. But Bill, what are your closing thoughts?
My closing thought is to meditate, to be peaceful, to take time out for yourself and for your inner selves in peace, so that you can then be able to summon the tenacity to keep in the fight without having to fight, to be anxious, to just be in there and listen and make a decision that it seems right for you. This is Blindsight and Jonathan Price and Bill Lundgren. We look forward to being with you again, talking about what we think is true, even though we're in different sides of issues. And so we wish you all well. Take care until the next episode.